Hello everyone, my name is Harrison,
And I'm Nick.
and we are from KeySmash Studios, and we're here today to talk about issues in game design, specifically with the popular open world game Space Engineers.
And keep in mind, all the things we're going to talk about are just based on our opinion, and any of this can and should be debated. We're by no means experts with this game, even though I personally have a couple hundred hours on it.
Our opinions should matter only because we're game design majors. I'm not saying that's super important, but we are studying in a 4-year degree for game design and development. So even though we are not professionals yet, we have worked around a lot of professionals and people who understand how this industry works and have flourished in this industry. With that, we want to hop right into it, and the first thing we're going to talk about today is the issues with progression in this game.
All right, yeah, so progression is a really bumpy thing with this game. The game can be really grindy, especially if you haven't experienced it before. Gathering materials and such, for example, is just something that's really core to this game, and if you don't have your settings boosted up, it can really affect the length of the game. So it's really just a huge portion of the game.
And it's very dramatic too, because when we recently played in the server, we had the settings boosted up to nearly 10 times for the capacity you can carry, vehicles can carry, and that you harvest from any patch of resources that you're working on grinding up. So I think that even though these can be edited, the fact that the core game takes so long just to gather materials is insane. And another reason that that's so painfully I guess so painfully viewed as an issue is because of how hard it is to learn the ropes, especially when it comes to building efficient ships, which are kind of our next points. Because learning the ropes in this game is super difficult. For somebody who's played it for a long time, even getting back into it takes a little bit of remembering. I have to remember what devices I need to build to get where, what buttons on the keyboard I need to hit to open different menus and whatever. And although tutorials can help with this, there's nothing if you just start the game to teach you these mechanics unless you've done the tutorial. And it's kind of a known fact amongst game designers that in a lot of cases, people will start a game before doing a tutorial of any kind, fail, and then go back and try to do the tutorial or Google things to learn, because people just don't want to do tutorial if they don't have to, and this game leaves you no choice.
And this game can be super punishing. If you just go in without any prior knowledge of the game, you're honestly going to be thrown for such a loop, especially because of the fact that if you mess up at all in the early game, example, destroy like an assembler or a refinery, and you don't have the ability to rebuild it, you basically just have to restart. So learning the ropes of this game, specifically like doing something like the tutorial, is pretty crucial to being able to effectively play the game early on.
And even with things like building a ship, I think that for a lot of people, the biggest issue with how long it takes to gather these resources is the fact that building a ship is such a high-risk, low-reward maneuver, because if you're positive that you built a great ship, you've never built one before, but you're like, man, this ship is great, I know it's going to work, I'm going to use it to mine more materials more efficiently, and the first thing you do is try to fly your ship, crash, and blow it up, you will maybe recover scrap iron from that ship and a few components, but you will not at all get what you put into it, making your time gathering resources and whatever to build this first ship essentially wasted, which it makes it hard to continue playing the game if you suffer a loss like that.
The learning curve definitely is difficult, but it also adds depth to the game, and it can be super rewarding when you do things correctly. Being able to properly balance out a ship with its thrusters and weight capacity and its ability to maybe mine things if you're doing specifically like a mining ship, it's just a great feeling. Obviously, it sucks when you create a mining ship and you mine something and all of a sudden you're overweight of what you thought you could move around with the thrusters and all of that. But it is a learning process, and learning it and getting it correct after failing is definitely very rewarding.
Which is true, and the mining issue does lead me to my last kind of problem with the way that the progression mechanics work, and that's simply finding materials. Now, I understand that in an open world exploration game like this, finding materials is part of the fun. You want to go out, hunt for what you need, find it, and bring it back, but that can be super difficult, because the only way to find materials, if you've never played this game, by the way, would be impossible to know, is that you have to hold a drill in your hand or have an ore detector with you in some capacity, and then just run. And sometimes you can run kilometers in the game before you find a resource. And with none of the gathering mechanics turned up, you're going to dig down, get a full inventory of that resource, and then have to run for 4 minutes back to your base, grind it up, and then repeat that process, making gathering a basic material that you need for building for any part of the game take a half hour just because of the distances you have to run, especially early game when you can't waste your jetpack fuel or anything like that.
Now, it is important to note that on the asteroids, you can see the materials on the surface.
That is true.
Versus the planet, you really can't do that. There actually is a slight visual indicator about where materials are, but it's super hard to see. And I've spent hours trying to like adjust my eyes to being able to recognize that, and it's honestly just very hard to do.
I've never even noticed it. Honestly, the only material I notice above ground are the huge ice lakes, and that's kind of a giveaway. So, but with that, I think it's important that we move on to the next big topic, and that's the story mode for this game. And even though the story mode isn't paramount to this game, it's something that they added as a way to enjoy and more of a tutorial experience, but to interact with AI and to learn about the game, it pointed out some issues to me. And the first one's Wonky Collision.
Yeah, Wonky Collision is definitely a big issue with this game. Things like voxels are super hard to get right. Just like in general, when you're mining, you can honestly get stuck if you run out of jetpack fuel. So it's super weird sometimes with this game, especially like also with blocks getting damaged, you actually kind of can get stuck in them. It's really weird.
Yeah, and like an issue I had in the campaign is that in one of the missions, I was walking from an elevator onto a platform. Relatively simple transfer, but because of the way the ground was laid out, the metal plates formed kind of a V, a dip where you're walking straight, it goes down ramp, up ramp, back to flat, and it wasn't destroyed, it wasn't damaged, it was supposed to be there, but me just walking through that V, I got stuck. It was only about knee height, you could imagine, so it's not like I fell in a pit. I was literally just floating where the two hitboxes went down to a point so small that I couldn't touch the ground and I got caught between them. And I had to use a jetpack to get out. And for a completed scenario, it's just kind of astounding that that kind of thing can slip by.
Another issue with the game that kind of really cropped up during story mode was the ambient noise. This is really apparent more on the planets than on an asteroid, because on the asteroid it's in space and, you can't really hear stuff in space.
Yeah, no one can hear you scream in space.
On the planets, honestly, it feels really empty. Like that's my best way of describing it. You don't have really any like wind sound effects. There's no birds chirping from like the trees that are all around. There's not really anything. Just like bass noises like your refinery if it's on, and if you're like drilling stuff. Those are the only noises you really hear.
Yeah, and it's kind of jarring because you'd expect to hear just anything, honestly, when you're moving through the game, but most of what I can remember hearing while playing was drilling noises. And if there is some kind of noise that maybe I've learned to tone out, it's because it was so dull to me personally that I lost it. The last big issue for me is just the way dialogue works in this. This is kind of nitpicky, honestly, but when you're playing the campaign, you're getting a lot of dialogue from Goodbot or from random space traders and whatever, and it all comes through the text box. Like with any game, Ark, Minecraft, Space Engineers, when you try to chat, dialogue box comes up in the bottom left quadrant of the screen, and usually that's just for sending small messages to other people, but in this it's feeding you whole paragraphs through that, and I just thought that was kind of a gross way to deliver dialogue, along with the fact that Goodbot's name indicator, its color was set to kind of a light gray, light blue, which made it really hard to distinguish his name from the text, making it seem like one long string of text. But that's just nitpicking to move us on to our final point, which is the multiplayer of the game, kind of the bread and butter.
The multiplayer is kind of like a double-edged sword, because it's by far the funnest point in the game for playing the game, but it also is just terrible to play through in certain ways. Mainly stability. I think Harrison has the best example of it, which is the docking trap issue.
Yeah, and docking trap isn't exactly what it's named. I kind of just started calling it that, but essentially the docking trap is when you're building a ship, especially in space, you're going to have these little ports, or they're connectors, and it's what you use to connect your ship to a base so that you can dock it, you can get rid of cargo, you can recharge your ship's batteries, whatever. But when this happens sometimes, and it happened to me specifically, you'll dock, say you're on an asteroid, you dock your ship, when you go to undock, unless you have crazy good thrusters, and even in some cases if you do have them, you get caught in kind of a black hole. So it's essentially like your ship is stuck in a fixed point in space, no matter how hard you try to fly it away, and the rest of space is leaving you. So if you're If space is leaving you in a direction where your ship would go through your base, you have no choice but to watch your ship get dragged through your base, destroying whatever it comes into contact with based on collision. And this issue is so annoying because, one, it's been around for a long time, and the only known fix is restarting the server, and that's temporary, and I don't like that.
This isn't an issue that just he had. It was an issue that everybody on our server was having.
Yeah, and as we continue to play, you could continually see this get worse as you start to do more and more on the server. Now, this could be something that only pops up if your server is starting to get overloaded or has been active for too long, but we'd only been on for a couple of hours, and we only had 4 or 5 players. It just felt like something that should be fixed by now, especially with how long it seems like it's been around.
And that's kind of how all of the stability issues with multiplayer are. Another good example of this is the issue where we had characters that would start skipping along platforms. It doesn't matter if it was on the planet or in space, you would start skipping along a platform and you wouldn't stop until you just lost momentum or you skipped off the platform.
Which I remember happening and was insanely annoying. If you stopped flying with your jetpack at all to touch the ground, it's like the ground was made out of a constant rubber. It's like all of the hitboxes were turned to bounce you away, so every platform you stood on would shoot you right off. And it wasn't fast, it was a constant jarring bouncing motion, almost nauseating, and it just wouldn't stop. We had to restart the server, and again, we only had a few people on this server. We were doing some relatively large builds at the time and had some big machines, but I just don't think that should be an issue that pops up by building something within the realm of the game.
Now, it is important to mention that the multiplayer, if you look beside these issues, is super, super addicting, honestly. It's so much fun to play this game with friends. Just being able to build gigantic space stations, mining ships, work together, and just, do anything, or, fight each other. Create 2 different factions and just go to war. It's all super fun, and I think it does kind of make up a little bit for the issues, but the issues are still very crippling at times.
Yeah, and that's just what we wanted to talk about. And although we did bring up mostly negatives in this discussion, it is worth noting that we still love this game. We have still played hundreds of hours of it, and we just enjoy building rockets, traveling to space, and, enjoying the general game with our friends. And I would totally recommend that anybody try this before you take our opinion as fact, because I don't want you to be steered away from a great experience because 2 guys are, pointing out the few bad parts. Overall, it's a good game.
I think it's important to note real quick that the game is still receiving updates. So some of these issues we're talking about, they could be fixed in the future.
Yeah, the only reason that I think it's important to point them out is because this game has been out for a long time and has been sold for money for a long time. And if you're going to sell a game, you should really make sure that as many issues as possible are fixed before you get it out into the open, Either way, love it or hate it, these were our opinions. And we were happy to share them, and we hope to be back with another game next time. We really hope that you guys can let us know in the comments below what kind of games you'd like for us to review, because we're really looking forward to using our knowledge as game designers to look deeper into games, look at what could be done better so that maybe as people make more games, they'll be good. Please subscribe if you get the chance, and we'll be happy to see you back here for the next one. Thank you very much.